President Trump has renewed his warnings to Iran against supporting the Houthis in Yemen.
The death toll in the aftermath of the recent bombing by the Americans on the port city of Hodeidah in Yemen.
The Middle East is once again engulfed in flames. With tens of thousands of troops, stealth bombers, and two powerful aircraft carriers, the United States is launching an unprecedented military campaign against the Houthi forces in Yemen. As relentless airstrikes turn Hodeidah and Sana'a into ruins, the world holds its breath. Will the Houthis be forced to surrender? How will Iran respond? And what lies ahead for the people of Yemen caught in the crossfire of war? The United States escalates its military footprint in the Middle East. The United States has notably intensified its military presence in the Middle East, deploying a substantial and sophisticated force composed of approximately 40,000 troops. Complementing this sizable personnel deployment, the U.S. Navy has positioned the nuclear-powered aircraft carrier USS Harry S. Truman in regional waters, accompanied by advanced military assets, including B-2 stealth bombers, F-35 fighter jets, and sophisticated missile defense systems such as Patriot and Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, THAAD. This deployment marks not merely an incremental reinforcement, but represents one of Washington's most significant strategic escalations in the region in recent history. Analysts from respected institutions, including the Brookings Institution and the Atlantic Council, interpret this intensified U.S. military footprint as a deliberate response to growing security threats posed by Houthi insurgents in Yemen. Specifically, American airstrikes have concentrated heavily on areas under Houthi control, targeting two pivotal cities, Hodeidah and Sana'a, both serving critical roles within the insurgency's operational infrastructure. Hodeidah, the coastal port city, is widely documented by intelligence assessments from NATO allies and Middle East intelligence agencies as the primary entry point for Iranian-supplied weaponry, including ballistic missiles and armed drones. By prioritizing air raids and precision strikes on this key logistical hub, the U.S. strategically aims to sever critical supply lines and significantly impair the Houthis' combat capabilities. Meanwhile, the inland capital Sana'a represents the Houthis' central military and political command nexus, hosting missile launch sites, extensive ammunition storage facilities, and drone launch pads instrumental in coordinating attacks against U.S. and allied maritime assets. Beyond the immediate tactical outcomes, deeper analysis suggests this aggressive military posture signals broader strategic objectives. Reports from RAND Corporation highlight that the extensive use of advanced aircraft such as B-2 bombers, capable of deploying heavy bunker-busting ordnance, indicates a clear intention to not merely degrade, but permanently dismantle the Houthis' strategic infrastructure, preventing future resurgence and discouraging further Iranian intervention. Moreover, geopolitical analysts argue that this U.S. military buildup should be understood within a wider framework of deterrence, specifically intended to signal unequivocal resolve to regional adversaries, chiefly Iran. With tensions between Washington and Tehran escalating amid disputes over nuclear policy, proxy conflicts, and regional influence, the robust deployment also serves as a pointed strategic message to Iranian policymakers, reinforcing U.S. commitments to safeguarding critical maritime trade routes, especially through the vital Bab el-Mandeb Strait, a strategic global choke point through which a substantial portion of world trade, including significant oil shipments, transits. Ultimately, while this significant military reinforcement undoubtedly enhances the short-term tactical advantage of U.S. forces in Yemen, it also raises critical questions about long-term strategic stability in the Middle East. Policy experts from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, caution that military strength alone cannot fully resolve underlying political tensions or socio-economic grievances, fueling regional conflicts. Hence, sustaining peace and regional security will likely demand complementary diplomatic initiatives and substantial humanitarian support to prevent further destabilization and avoid unintended humanitarian consequences. Detailed analysis of recent airstrike campaigns in Yemen. Hodeidah, strategic gateway under fire. Hodeidah, Yemen's principal port city, serves as a critical lifeline for the Houthi movement, acting as the primary entry point for Iranian-supplied weaponry, including drones, missiles, and various forms of ammunition. Recognizing its strategic significance, the United States recently intensified its aerial operations here, systematically targeting logistical hubs, missile launching platforms, and key command centers. Notably, military sources and independent analysts have reported sightings and intelligence indicating the deployment of advanced B-2 Spirit stealth bombers equipped with 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs, originating from Diego Garcia, an isolated yet strategically invaluable US-UK joint military base in the Indian Ocean. These massive ordnance penetrators, specially designed to destroy deeply buried or fortified targets, signal Washington's commitment to decisively crippling the operational capabilities of the Houthis, rather than merely disrupting their logistics temporarily. This approach reflects a nuanced shift in U.S. military strategy. Rather than scattershot engagements, American planners seem intent on precision-guided strikes aimed at permanently eliminating the Houthis' strategic infrastructure, particularly at the port. Observers from Middle Eastern news outlets such as Al Jazeera and regional security experts emphasize that the destruction of Hodeidah's facilities would drastically restrict Iranian resupply efforts, potentially shifting the power dynamics within Yemen significantly. Sana'a, decisive strikes at the capital's military heart. Simultaneously, in Sana'a, Yemen's embattled capital, U.S. airstrikes have repeatedly targeted Houthi drone launching sites, ammunition storage facilities, and military bases. According to both local and international sources, these sustained bombardments have severely damaged Houthi assets, diminishing their drone warfare capabilities significantly. Sana'a's residents reported ground-shaking explosions, signaling not only physical devastation but also psychological impacts on the Houthi fighters and local populace. From an analytical perspective, the concentrated nature of these strikes in Sana'a indicates a strategic attempt to disrupt the nerve center of Houthi command and control. Such a systematic degradation of military assets is a clear effort by Washington to pressure the Houthis into political submission, or at least a negotiated cessation of hostilities. Reports by think tanks like the International Crisis Group highlight that sustained pressure in Sana'a is crucial, given that the city houses the leadership cadre and strategic decision-makers of the insurgency. While these strikes clearly demonstrate Washington's tactical superiority and operational effectiveness, they also raise critical questions regarding long-term strategy and humanitarian consequences. The port of Hodeidah is a lifeline not only for weapons but also for food, medicine, and fuel needed by millions of civilians. Completely disabling such a critical infrastructure risks exacerbating Yemen's already dire humanitarian crisis, as underscored repeatedly by NGOs like Amnesty International and the United Nations. The United States faces a precarious balancing act, neutralizing Houthi military threats while preventing irreversible humanitarian damage. The current tactical successes may yield immediate military benefits, but strategic victory in Yemen arguably requires a broader solution, one combining military pressure with targeted diplomacy and humanitarian aid efforts. Without a careful, integrated approach, the short-term military gains from these dramatic airstrikes could inadvertently lead to deeper instability, increasing anti-U.S. sentiment and prolonging regional conflict. These airstrike campaigns in Hodeidah and Sana'a represent more than tactical operations. They signify a pivotal moment where military action and humanitarian considerations must be harmonized if lasting peace and stability are genuinely sought. Houthi response and prospects for a peace agreement. Facing unprecedented military pressure from relentless U.S. airstrikes, the Houthi leadership has signaled a willingness to negotiate, offering a conditional ceasefire specifically aimed at halting their attacks on American vessels in exchange for the cessation of U.S. bombing campaigns. This proposal represents a clear tactical shift, moving from aggressive confrontation toward a strategic de-escalation, likely driven by the severe losses inflicted upon their operational capabilities. From a strategic standpoint, this gesture by the Houthis can be viewed both as a pragmatic admission of vulnerability and as an attempt to retain some degree of leverage. Analysts from the Middle East Institute suggest that the Houthis' conditional peace overture underscores their recognition that continued hostilities against U.S. maritime assets could provoke even heavier reprisals, potentially devastating their remaining military infrastructure. In essence, the group's leadership seems to be testing diplomatic waters, seeking to secure breathing space without fully capitulating. Former President Donald Trump's stated objective to safeguard international maritime routes from Houthi disruptions further clarifies the broader strategic implications. Trump had openly emphasized the need to maintain security and freedom of navigation through critical maritime choke points, particularly around the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, one of the world's busiest shipping lanes. The cessation of Houthi attacks would significantly bolster maritime security, fulfilling Washington's primary strategic goal. According to analysis by the Council on Foreign Relations, achieving this stability would not only secure vital trade routes, but could also serve as an initial step toward broader conflict resolution in Yemen. However, achieving a durable ceasefire remains uncertain. Historical precedent and expert assessments, such as those offered by Chatham House, highlight the complexity of such agreements. Houthis have previously used negotiations tactically, pausing hostilities primarily to regroup and rebuild. This raises legitimate skepticism among U.S. military strategists and policy analysts regarding the authenticity and sustainability of the proposed truce. Additionally, given the Houthis' ideological alignment and historical support from Iran, the group's ultimate decisions could still be influenced by Tehran's geopolitical calculations, despite Iran's recent reduction of direct support due to intensified U.S. scrutiny. Impact on global maritime trade and economic stability. Since November 2023, the Houthi insurgents have intensified their maritime offensive, launching more than 100 documented attacks against both commercial and military vessels traversing the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. This strategic choke point, connecting the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden, serves as one of the world's most crucial shipping corridors. The persistent threat posed by the Houthis has effectively transformed this vital artery of global commerce into an area fraught with considerable risk, uncertainty, and economic vulnerability. From an economic perspective, these repeated Houthi incursions have had tangible and substantial repercussions. According to maritime insurers such as Lloyd's of London and reports from the International Maritime Organization, IMO, insurance premiums for ships passing through the Bab el-Mandeb have escalated dramatically, in some cases surging to levels 10 times higher than previously recorded norms. This escalation reflects insurers' recognition of increased risks stemming directly from threats of missile strikes, drone attacks, and piracy-like tactics employed by Houthi forces. Furthermore, an increasing number of commercial shipping firms, notably including industry giants like France's CMA CGM and Denmark's Maersk, have been forced to redirect their vessels to alternate, safer routes. More than 150 commercial ships, as reported by maritime intelligence agencies and shipping consultancy Drewry, have begun diverting around the Cape of Good Hope at Africa's southern tip. While avoiding direct confrontation, this detour significantly extends transit times and escalates operational expenses, adding approximately $1 million per round-trip voyage due to increased fuel consumption, crew logistics, and other associated overheads. The disruption of such a major trade artery inevitably exerts upward pressure on shipping costs across the critical Asia-Europe route, along which approximately 40% of global container traffic traditionally passes through the Suez Canal and Red Sea region, according to World Shipping Council estimates. Consequently, these elevated costs are gradually passed on to consumers, exacerbating inflationary pressures at a global scale. Economic think tanks like Oxford Economics and the World Economic Forum warn that persistent disruptions in this strategic passageway could further destabilize global markets already sensitive from recent inflation and supply chain disturbances following the COVID-19 pandemic. On a deeper analytical level, these maritime disruptions underscore a key vulnerability inherent within modern globalization. Supply chains today operate on the principles of efficiency and just-in-time inventory management, which, although beneficial under stable conditions, are highly susceptible to disruptions from geopolitical events. In this context, the Houthis' ability to threaten such a critical choke point exposes how relatively localized conflicts can cascade rapidly into broader global economic issues. Additionally, the ongoing volatility in Bab el-Mandeb is prompting some policymakers and strategists to advocate for increased international naval cooperation or even military interventions aimed at safeguarding maritime routes. Initiatives such as the U.S.-led Operation Prosperity Guardian and EU-led Operation Aegis have emerged precisely in response to these threats, highlighting the geopolitical ramifications of seemingly regional hostilities. While Houthi attacks represent an immediate military and security concern, their broader economic implications cannot be overlooked. The international community faces the pressing challenge of stabilizing this crucial maritime route. Failing to achieve lasting security in Bab el-Mandeb could have profound and enduring effects on global trade dynamics, consumer prices, and overall economic stability, highlighting once again the interconnectivity of today's geopolitical and economic landscapes. Iran's strategic withdrawal from Yemen, a shift in Middle East policy. Recent developments indicate a significant recalibration of Iran's involvement in Yemen, characterized primarily by the withdrawal of its military advisors and Revolutionary Guard personnel. This tactical retreat appears to stem from Tehran's determination to circumvent a direct military clash with the United States, especially in light of Washington's intensified campaign of targeted airstrikes and its large-scale military reinforcement throughout the Middle East. Reports from diverse international media sources, notably British outlets such as BBC and Reuters, as well as Iranian media platforms, confirm that Iranian leadership is increasingly skeptical about the Houthis' ability to withstand sustained U.S. military pressure. These sources suggest that Iran's strategic calculus has evolved, recognizing that further investment in the Yemeni conflict might yield diminishing returns and potentially provoke catastrophic direct confrontations. Tehran's recent actions, therefore, seem designed not merely to limit losses, but also to carefully reposition itself in the wider regional geopolitical landscape. In-depth analyses from think tanks like Carnegie Endowment and the Atlantic Council underline that this shift signals a broader strategic pivot by Iran. Facing persistent and escalating U.S. sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and repeated threats of military strikes on its nuclear facilities under the Trump administration's maximum pressure campaign, Iran appears compelled to prioritize internal stability and direct national security interests. Consequently, Tehran's withdrawal from Yemen can be interpreted as a deliberate strategy to conserve critical resources, both military and economic, in anticipation of potentially more severe and immediate challenges at home, or in other more strategically significant theaters, such as Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. Moreover, some Middle Eastern security experts, including analysts from Al-Monitor and the Institute for the Study of War, suggest that Iran's reduced support for Houthi insurgents is indicative of an overall rethinking of its proxy warfare tactics. The heightened vigilance of U.S. intelligence and the explicit warning by former President Trump that any attack orchestrated by Iranian proxies would be considered a direct Iranian assault appear to have succeeded in deterring further overt provocations. Such a stern message from Washington has undoubtedly prompted Iranian strategists to reassess their proxy network, scaling down support or making it less conspicuous to avoid direct attribution and escalation. From a broader analytical perspective, Iran's strategic withdrawal from Yemen could carry substantial implications for the regional balance of power. If Tehran genuinely reduces its backing, the Houthis could lose crucial logistical, military, and technical support, significantly weakening their ability to sustain prolonged conflict. This could open pathways toward renewed peace negotiations and stabilization efforts led by international mediators or regional players like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Yet, it remains important to recognize that Tehran's withdrawal may not necessarily imply total disengagement. Historical patterns indicate Iran often strategically scales back, or pauses its visible involvement while maintaining indirect channels of influence, reserving the capacity to quickly re-escalate support if geopolitical dynamics shift favorably. Thus, observers and policymakers must remain vigilant, closely monitoring Tehran's long-term intentions rather than assuming a permanent shift. Yemen's deepening humanitarian crisis, a complex web of war and despair. Yemen's ongoing humanitarian catastrophe continues to intensify, creating conditions that have forced countless civilians into desperate escapes, primarily through the severely compromised port city of Hodeidah. Waves of Yemenis, driven by despair and chronic insecurity, are fleeing toward neighboring Somalia and risking perilous journeys toward Europe, as extensively reported by humanitarian organizations like the International Rescue Committee, IRC, and Doctors Without Borders, MSF. This mass exodus not only underscores the severity of the crisis, but also exposes the profound failures of international diplomacy and humanitarian intervention efforts thus far. The relentless series of targeted airstrikes, particularly those executed by U.S. forces aimed at crippling Houthi military assets, have inadvertently devastated essential civilian infrastructure. Independent analyses from organizations such as Human Rights Watch, HRW, and reports by the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OKHA, highlight extensive damage to fuel depots, storage facilities, and critical port infrastructure within Hodeidah. These airstrikes, while strategically intended to sever the Houthis' military supply chains, have consequently crippled Yemen's capacity to import vital resources, drastically worsening the country's chronic fuel shortages and aggravating its already precarious humanitarian situation. Moreover, the Houthis' tight grip over Yemen's dwindling fuel reserves has become another source of extreme hardship for the civilian population. According to recent field assessments by Amnesty International, the rebels' control over local fuel distribution networks has enabled them to impose exorbitant price hikes. This profiteering exacerbates the desperation felt by ordinary Yemenis, further eroding their purchasing power, limiting access to food, clean water, and healthcare, and dramatically intensifying existing socioeconomic inequalities. Such deliberate manipulation of essential resources often serves a dual purpose: generating funds to sustain military operations while simultaneously deepening civilian dependency on rebel-controlled resources. Furthermore, Yemen's humanitarian crisis cannot be viewed solely through the lens of immediate shortages or refugee movements. It also necessitates understanding the longer-term impact on regional stability and global security. Migration to Somalia, a nation itself grappling with significant security and humanitarian challenges, risks further destabilizing the Horn of Africa region. Similarly, refugee flows toward Europe amplify political and social pressures in already strained European immigration systems, potentially exacerbating geopolitical tensions in host nations. Thus, addressing Yemen's humanitarian tragedy requires more than emergency aid. It demands comprehensive strategies that integrate military restraint, diplomatic negotiation, economic stabilization, and long-term developmental support. Without decisive international intervention to stabilize infrastructure, regulate essential commodity markets, and ensure safe humanitarian corridors, Yemen's humanitarian nightmare will likely persist and deepen, creating conditions ripe for prolonged instability and regional spillover. In essence, the humanitarian crisis in Yemen vividly illustrates the unintended human toll of military strategies aimed solely at strategic objectives. Sustainable peace and stability can only emerge when immediate humanitarian needs are prioritized and integrated into broader security frameworks, effectively balancing military actions with targeted humanitarian interventions. Future outlook: strategic encirclement and the prospects for peace. The simultaneous deployment of two formidable U.S. aircraft carriers, the USS Harry S. Truman and the USS Carl Vinson, has created a strategic encirclement designed to severely limit the operational flexibility of Yemen's Houthi insurgents. This decisive positioning not only showcases Washington's determination, but also signals a calculated escalation in its regional security approach, leveraging naval dominance and sophisticated military capabilities to significantly diminish the Houthis' ability to wage sustained warfare. From a tactical perspective, the presence of these carriers effectively places Houthi-controlled territories under constant surveillance and direct threat of rapid response strikes, constraining their freedom of maneuver and compelling them toward political accommodation or military surrender. Security analysts from the U.S. Naval Institute USNI and the RAND Corporation emphasize that this type of naval encirclement strategy typically aims at psychological deterrence as much as tactical suppression, applying continuous pressure to undermine enemy morale, logistical capabilities, and ultimately their willingness to continue hostilities. Given the realities on the ground, experts from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSES, and Middle East Institute project an increasingly clear scenario. The Houthis, facing dwindling resources, damaged infrastructure, and reduced external backing from allies like Iran, might be compelled to seriously engage in ceasefire negotiations or even accept terms of surrender. However, historical precedent and regional complexities suggest that achieving a lasting ceasefire or definitive surrender remains a nuanced and intricate process, necessitating careful negotiation, monitoring, and enforcement mechanisms to ensure adherence. Critically, even if the Houthis agree to terms under current military pressures, the U.S. military's strategic posture indicates that complete withdrawal is improbable. According to analyses from geopolitical think tanks such as Chatham House and the Carnegie Endowment, Washington is likely to maintain a residual yet highly capable military presence. This enduring deployment serves multiple strategic purposes: maintaining leverage in ongoing diplomatic dialogues, rapidly responding to any resurgence in hostilities, and securing vital maritime trade routes in the Red Sea, particularly the economically critical Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Further analysis reveals that this pressure and presence strategy, combining diplomatic negotiations with persistent military readiness, exemplifies contemporary U.S. foreign policy's hybrid approach. The approach ensures flexibility in reacting swiftly to unpredictable developments while still actively shaping conditions conducive to a negotiated settlement. Moreover, U.S. policymakers recognize that a complete withdrawal might embolden not only Houthis but also other regional adversaries, primarily Iran and affiliated proxies, to escalate their destabilizing activities once more, potentially reigniting broader regional tensions. The intensified conflict in Yemen underscores how strategic military decisions can ripple through global economics, regional stability, and humanitarian realities. Amidst power plays and geopolitical maneuvering, the ultimate toll falls heavily on civilians caught in the crossfire. This prompts an essential reflection. What responsibilities do powerful nations hold when intervening in regional conflicts? And how can peace be achieved without exacerbating human suffering? Share your thoughts in the comments below.